This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Dialogue. The UN Biodiversity Conference, known as COP15, currently underway in Montreal, Canada. The meeting is focused on reaching an agreement on specific targets for the world during the coming decade in reversing biodiversity loss. How close are we to a breakthrough? As chair of the negotiations, does China have the will, leadership, and expertise to make that happen? Is China's performance setting an example for stemming biodiversity loss? And what challenges does the world face in meeting the new biodiversity targets after failing old ones set for the last decade? To find out more, I'm pleased to be joined from Montreal, Canada, by Dr. Lin Li, Senior Director of Global Policy and Advocacy at the Worldwide Fund for Nature International. Joining me from Beijing, Zhang Li, Professor of Conservation Biology from Beijing Normal University, and Isabel Hilton, Founder and Senior Advisor of China Dialogue, an NGO focused on environmental issues based in Beijing and London. She's joining us from London. That's our topic. I'm Li Xin, sitting in for Xu Qingduo. So welcome to Dialogue, everybody. Professor Zhang, let me go to you first. You have been tracking China's biodiversity efforts and general policy. What do we know about China's next specific goals in preserving biodiversity? I understand a set of 8 goals, specific goals, were outlined in the 20th, in the report of the 20th Party Congress, which was wrapped up in last October. What can you tell us about what China is thinking in terms of biodiversity?
As we know that China have an ambitious goal for the next 10 years for biodiversity conservation, not only for the country, but globally. As the chair of the CBD COP15, China, as a chair, already achieved a lot of achievement in the past years, especially for some endangered species conservation, as well as set up the new national park system. And China also made a commitment to set up a 1.5 billion RMB Kunming Biodiversity Conservation Fund last year. All of this, I believe, is China wants to show its strong leadership as the chairman of this COP. And I think although there are a lot of difficulties during the negotiation in Montreal, but China as a chair, with this report of the China's own achievement, but I believe China can show it's willing to support and assist all parties at conference of CTBD to reach a new next 10-year biodiversity conservation framework in the next couple of days, I believe.
Let's hope that. But Dr. Li, you're in the midst of the heated debates and discussions. What is your observation, and what difference does it make when China is chairing this very important meeting in the history of biodiversity conservation?
Thank you, Lucy. As Professor Zhang mentioned, China has achieved a lot domestically. And then when China become, we call it president of the Conference of Parties here in for the Convention of Biological Diversity, CBD, the world expectation on China to play a leadership role is very high, very high. I think China's on the global diplomacy and the biodiversity policy role is different from other countries playing. So the world is really with eager eyes looking what China gonna do. We really hope what China has done domestically, as Professor Zhang mentioned, could China could use as a presidency the opportunity to show the world and also unite the world to lead to a future that we want. As I say, expectation on China is very high.
Well, we are a week into the negotiations, and this was expected to be the Paris moment. And for Paris, it was very, very heated debate and discussion until the last minute. So from your observation, how well are the negotiations going, and what specifically is being done to steer the negotiations towards the desired end?
The negotiations have gone on for about 4 years, actually starting in 2018, when the 14th Conference of Parties finished in Sharm el-Sheikh. It started already. So we have gone through like 5 open-ended working groups negotiation where country and parties coming together negotiate. So starting December 7th in Montreal, it's actually the COP15, the second part of COP15 started. So going like more than 1 week already into the negotiation, I can tell you from the front, because I've been here starting from December 2nd, I've been here already. I've observed the change of mood in the room and the topic and the debate. I could say debate is very heated. There is a quite strong negotiation around ambition. That ambition has 2 fronts: ambition of the future that we want, and also ambition of how do we get there. So I would say currently I see the ambition about halt and reverse biodiversity loss as a mission to be a nature positive future is hotly debated. And then how to through the conservation of the the best, and also sustainably manage the rest, and also reduce the drivers of biodiversity loss so that we don't further lose that. Those ambitions are hotly debated, but then they are sometimes holding hostage by the financial resources on the ground, on the table. Yeah, so that's really the debate then.
Let's talk about that in just a moment. Let me get to Ms. Hilton and get her take on the pause, sitting in London, watching everything going and having tracked China's efforts on environmental and biodiversity issues since 2016, possibly even earlier. Isabel, what is your observation of the possibility that China is able to steer these negotiations to something that people can put their hands on, meaning a post-2020 biodiversity target framework?
Well, I think we must all hope so. I agree with everything that's been said about China's domestic record. It has been outstanding in the last few years. But, chairing these conferences is not an easy task. And this has been referred to as the Paris of biodiversity. And I also covered the Paris COP on climate change. And one of the remarkable things about bringing Paris together was that there was a widespread agreement. There was an agreement, for example, between Barack Obama and Xi Jinping to bring the agreement home in Paris, and the French diplomatic service spent 2 years going around the world identifying the difficulties, seeing how they could be managed, trying to bring people together, and they finally succeeded. But it was a huge effort. And if we look at this COP, it has had very bad luck. There has been a global pandemic. So that kind of face-to-face diplomacy that was so intense in the run-up to Paris has been extremely difficult. We've also, we're in a world where the geopolitical kind of framework has deteriorated since Paris. So the big players are not on the same terms. In fact, the United States isn't even in the CBD. So it's a very, very difficult job hosting these conferences.
Which is the Convention on Biodiversity.
Exactly. Yeah. So what the chair's job is, it's to help resolve the outstanding obstacles. And these are sitting in the text in square brackets. And we started this process 10 days ago with an awful lot of square brackets. And that's a reflection of the difficulties, I think, both of producing a robust agreement and an agreement that can be implemented, and agreement that can be financed, an agreement that meets the needs of all parties. It's a massive task. And what we don't want at this point is a repetition of what happened in Aichi, where an agreement was reached, but every target was missed. We really we're at a point now where we can't afford that kind of failure. So all eyes, as Lin Li said, are on China to bring this home.
This is such an interesting and tricky moment, isn't it? Isabel just talked about last time, actually, the fact that China and the United States could reach an agreement between these two major countries greatly facilitated the Paris Agreement on climate change. Right now, the United States, Professor Zhang, let me go to you. The United States not being a signatory to the CBD, the Convention on Biodiversity, where does that leave China in terms of leading the effort, the global efforts, or being one leading actor in biodiversity? Does that increase the chances of an agreement or reduces the chance of an agreement?
No matter US is not a member of CBD, I believe that, well, all the parties of the convention should and will make strong, ambitious, and achievable goals for the post-2020 biodiversity framework in the next couple of days, because we all believe and trust that the biodiversity is extremely important to preserve our Mother Earth. No matter US or other parties, parties or non-party of the convention, I believe China will play as a key important role as its presidency of this COP15, together with other parties who also believe the CBD and biodiversity conservation should be should have post 2020 goals, achievable goals, because we all understand, as Isabel said, none of 20 Archie biodiversity targets have been fully made. But for next 10 years, we believe that we need to have ambitious goals, but we also need to have achievable goals. That's why the importance of the next couple of days.
So the thing is, Professor Zhang, you talk about the goals being achievable while being ambitious, but even Aichi, that was for the last decade. Even Aichi goals were not met. So how can we set new and higher goals and still want to achieve them? What has changed this time, Professor Zhang?
I still remember that back to the COP10, during the COP10, inside China, people still discussed whether we should agree with those Archie targets, 15% of territory protected area commitment, or 7% of marine conservation targets. But now we talk about the 30-30, as we know that China, I personally believe China could agree on the support the 30-30 targets, because now is totally different inside the country, and see the globally, and all the nations conference parties of CBD believe that we should have a certain amount of protected area left to preserve the Mother Earth's nature, so that I believe, well, if 30-30 target can be agreed, then other commitment or targets should make a final agreement, I believe.
Okay. All right, Dr. Lin, help the laymen and women watching this understand this 30-30, because not everybody is following this so closely. Basically, I understand is to protect 30% of land and sea areas of the Earth by the year 2030. But how do we understand that? 30% of land and 30% of ocean, is that the idea? Help us understand a little bit better.
It's currently what we are proposing, still on the table, still in the bracket, is by 2030, we protect at least 30% of land and ocean respectively. Basically, it's land, 30% land, 30% ocean. And in the land, also water, right? We also have a fresh water, all that. So basically land, territorial area, fresh water and ocean, all supposed to be protected. At least 30% should be protected. But that's also including the quality of it, not just like, put the land, the area, but the quality, the connectivity, the interconnectedness of that, because the wildlife needs to be connected. So that's really at least, we'll call it protect the best, at least the 30% that's needed, the whole humanity and other wildlife to be able to have a stable safety net for the survival of the species and people. But importantly is that 30 by 30 doesn't mean just protect 30%, because we need really sustainably manage the rest. Without sustainably manage the rest and also reduce the driver, that 30% will not stay, and our life supporting system will not be safe.
What is the situation now? I mean, what's the percentage that are protected now, for instance, for land and for sea? I know the number in China is still quite low. For instance, for China, I understand, is only less than 5% of the ocean is protected, and some 17 to 18% of land area is protected. Where is the global average at this moment, Dr. Lin?
Sure. So the Aichi target has said that 17% of the land and also 10% of the ocean should be protected. I think the 17% by number is achieved. Well, the ocean has not fully achieved. That's really the global but then the connectivity quality was not there, but the number 17% achieved. So that's the global situation. I think for China, it's let me take it back. So protected has many meanings. So at this moment, it's talk about a protection, about protected area or nature reserves, but there's also another term called other effective area-based conservation, or ECM, that including, for example, the land that owned by indigenous people and local communities, but with the purpose of biodiversity conservation or with the outcome of biodiversity conservation. So that's the world is able to reach more target than the 17% set in the Aichi target. That's why the 30% of protection is reachable, because we have those different measures that can be built in. Ocean is a challenge. You're right. In China's ocean target is way less than it's needed. That also means we have to step up our ambition, because ocean providing so much food for us. With depleted ocean, we have no place to go. That's only one planet. So that has to be stepped up.
Well, let's talk about the money, which is one of the issues that Dr. Lin, you mentioned as the most contentious issue. And let me go to Ms. Hilton there. Money always seems to be the bottleneck, whether for climate change or for biodiversity. But I understand the global gap is calculated to be something like $700 billion US. If I'm wrong, please correct me. But the money that is being asked by national governments to put in biodiversity is actually not that much. Why is money such a big issue here?
Well, there are various figures. If you look at what UNEP estimates, the United Nations Environment Programme estimates that by 2025, we're going to need $384 billion US every year to invest in the protection and management of nature. Now, of that, we know that China has pledged 233 million for biodiversity protection. Xi Jinping promised that last year in Kunming. Canada has promised roughly double that. I think it's the US 590 million for indigenous-led conservation in Canada. The European Union, which is the biggest donor, has pledged 7.4 billion for 2021 to 2027, and Germany has made another 1 billion commitment to nature within its climate finance. But as you point out, this is nowhere near the target that's required. And, this is always a difficulty. It's a particular difficulty now because of the state of the global economy. which after the pandemic and the Russian invasion of Ukraine is in a fairly fragile state. And we're looking at, inflation and recession around the world. So it's very difficult for governments at this point to make very substantial commitments. But at the same time, for countries that are being asked to conserve nature, many of them rather poor countries, they obviously need support. So there are a number of arguments
but
going on.
What is the gap now? What is how big do you estimate to be the gap between what is needed and what are already pledged from the number that you gave us? Do you have a rough idea what must be?
Well, given that UNEP says we need 384 billion a year, the difficulty with producing an absolute gap is that the pledges that have been made are not necessarily annual pledges. They're either over a 2-year period or in some cases a 5-year period. So but it's a very big gap. And it's clearly, I think it's going to be difficult to meet that from public funds. There is a UN donor fund called the Global Environment Facility, and that is expected to have $5.3 billion for the next 4 years. The difficulty there is that the money tends to go to middle income countries. So the biggest beneficiaries of that money have been China, Brazil, India, Mexico, and Indonesia. So the poorest countries complain that they're not getting what they need to preserve nature. And some of the discussion, and I'm sure Lin Li has been following this very closely, but some of the discussion in Montreal has been around how do you mobilize private finance? How do you motivate business to invest in protection of nature? What sort of safeguards do you need if business is doing this to ensure that it's not just greenwash, that it really has an effect? And how do you structure that so there's accountability and transparency in the operations of business, and the idea that business could be nature positive? So instead of destroying nature, it could actively support the restoration. But I think it's unlikely public funds are going to meet the gap in the short term.
Okay. So from the negotiations, that what are countries really squabbling about in terms of funding, and do you see a kind of possibility that an agreement can eventually be reached and that countries will be paying? Because in terms of climate change, what happened is you have an agreement, but nobody is paying in the years afterwards.
Yeah, the debate here is very high on, on ambition, as I mentioned earlier, on content of ambition and also ambition on resources. Let me just focus on resources, as you just asked. So the debate is still focusing on the, development aid funding, ODA, overseas development aid. Basically, developing countries requiring developed countries to provide funding for the conservation in the developing countries through the international flow of financing. That is needed, and then the developing countries should be the beneficiary of that. But that part is just tip of iceberg of all the financial needs and also financial opportunities. So think about it. We actually have private finance to provide. We also can mobilize domestic funding through the tax, through the subsidies. And there is also philanthropies and multilateral banks. But most importantly, I want to call is that we have to remember our earth, our home is on fire. This house on fire. We put water as a conservation funding in, but we also put oil, knowingly or unknowingly, on it through the subsidies that are harmful to nature. Remember, that number is $1 trillion a year, which equal 2% of GDP, has been put on the fire that we're trying to.
$1 trillion US dollars a year.
1.8 trillion per year as harmful subsidies. So yeah, I think debate on ODA is good, healthy, continue to do that, but also really looking into each country, every country, looking at, do you put the subsidies that is subsidizing the actions harmful nature? If so, remove that, because removing that will not immediately put money on the conservation, but it will reduce the need, reduce the harmful impact on nature, so that the need of conserving or restoring will be fewer, less than if you don't do that action. So I would say we are at NGOs here urging countries to talk about providing financial resources from rich countries to poorer countries, yes, but also more looking into other sources, all sources, and also looking into domestic funding to realign, repurpose, and eliminate the harmful subsidies so that we can actually benefit nature for all of us.
Yeah. Isabel, let me go to you for my last question. As you said, money is definitely needed, or cutting down subsidies is much needed at this moment, and yet the economy is not good and people are having trouble with their livelihoods. But how would you put it? I mean, if we look back in 5 years, how do you define this moment? What kind of decision do we have to make in terms of biodiversity?
Well, first of all, I would completely endorse what Lin Li said about harmful subsidies, and G20 has been promising to remove these for years. So that's absolutely essential. Money's going into the wrong thing right now, and we need to direct it to the right thing. But I think that we all need to understand that if humanity is to survive, and we depend on nature to survive, then we have to rethink the way we approach. You know, Xi Jinping said Green Mountain is a gold mountain, and he's absolutely right. We cannot thrive as a species if we continue to destroy nature. And so we all have to think about how we live, about our diets. We have to think about whether we participate in an extractive economy or a circular economy. This is a radical rethink that's demanded, a systemic rethink that's demanded if we are to turn this around. And I very much hope this can be the moment when this really begins. It's looking a little fragile now, but if we don't, then this mass extinction that we are living through will continue. And in the end, that's a mass extinction of human beings as well as of nature. So it's a huge moment.
So let's keep our fingers crossed and keep watching the situation and hope for the best. Many thanks, Isabel Hilton, founder and senior advisor of China Dialogue, Dr. Lin Li, senior director of Global Policy and Advocacy at the Worldwide Fund for Nature International, and Professor Zhang Li of Conservation Biology from Beijing Normal University. That's it for this edition of The Dialogue. I'm Li Xin, sitting in for Xu Qingduo. On behalf of the whole team, thank you for watching. And soon.